Hello and welcome once again to Gaming Under the Influence. I'm Mike here with Alex, coming from GreenDragonCVR in Woodbridge to talk about video games.
Oh, yeah.
How are you, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good, man. How are you?
I'm not bad either. I just finished the main game of Dark Souls 2, and I feel good about that. Yeah.
That's
It's
amazing.
like the first one, yeah.
Guys making progress like crazy.
Yeah, within a week of finishing the first game, I got to the end of the main game in number 2, and now I'm cleaning up the DLCs.
Nice.
And I think I'd like to take the chance to make the point that, man, to me, this game is as good as the first.
Yeah.
No, I know it's viewed by the fandom as the black sheep of the Souls-like family.
Yeah,
but,
to some degree, yes. Yeah, you're right.
I think in many ways, it's a serious advancement on Dark Souls 1.
Do you feel like that's only the case because, like, Miyazaki not being the director? Like, it's just like a kind of like that's like the definitive reason, and
that definitely contributed to the perception that it's an inferior title, of course, yeah. And for good reason. You know, I sympathize with that, but I don't think it's been borne out. Like, the game speaks differently, right?
Fair.
And what all this attests to, in my opinion, is the presence at FromSoft of more than just like this cult of Miyazaki. There's a like-minded, school of designers there, like who share similar ideas about.
You got to think he wouldn't want somebody doing it who wasn't like he didn't trust to.
That's true, of course, yes, and
pull it off and do a proper job of it. Like
the director, whose name is Tanimura, he also was co-director of Elden Ring since then, and he worked on all of the projects, of course. So,
right. Okay.
Yeah, he's widely credited with taking the troubled development of Dark Souls 2 and producing what became a very critically acclaimed game out of it. It's got a 91 on Metacritic.
Similar to what Miyazaki did with the original Demon Souls.
Similar, yeah.
Which is amazing. That's right. That's great.
Yeah. So I think that definitely did contribute to the perception of this as an inferior title, and people list all kinds of other things, but we'll talk about that as we get through these points as to why I think it's an excellent game, And the first of those being, I've been talking to you about this over the past week a little bit, but the first thing is obviously that, in gameplay terms, it's an advancement. It feels better.
Definitely a better.
So many ways. A bunch of interesting mechanical decisions. Again, resented by the fandom. I'm specifically thinking of the agility stat. But it's something that I really appreciate in this game.
An agility stat?
Yeah. Sure.
What does that do? Is that like your...
That determines... Oh, I should start with that, of course. Like what they have in this game is something called an agility stat. And if you put stats into a couple of different... if you put points into a couple of different stats on your character sheet, your agility stat will go up. And your agility stat at certain benchmarks will increase the number of iframes on your roll.
Aha.
Yes. So... what this does is it gives you the ability, if you're playing a character like I play in all of these games, you're not reliant on shields at all. You want to just dodge every attack.
Dodge everything, yeah.
You can spend some levels on making it easier for you to do that.
Yeah.
It's a great mechanic.
Just get a wider range of iframes.
That's right. And
not take damage during rolls.
It doubles the iframes that you had in Dark Souls 1. So your roll is much more effective.
That's incredible,
right?
Yeah. That's huge. After just beating the wolf boss in Dark Souls 1, I like finding the timing of when you can dodge his sword attacks. Yeah. Imagine that being doubled. Oh my god.
Course.
Now, cakewalk through it.
You start actually much lower. Not much lower, but you do start with less iframes than Dark Souls 1. So it more than doubles what you start this game with actually by the end if you invest to the upper limit.
So it kind of gimps you at first, and I mean by the time you level up, it gets better anyway. That's interesting. That's very interesting. I bet it's the only game that has something like that. Or did that carry over to 3 at all?
No, it did not carry over. You cannot adjust, to my knowledge, your iframes in any other FromSoft Souls game. Not Sekiro nor Bloodborne.
So it's got its own interesting quirks, which is cool because instead of just being the exact same thing but a little bit different, it's got its own soul, right? There's a lot of different things going on.
I think in a game where you're building characters at all, not like Sekiro, this is a straightforward advancement on the concept of character building. People may dislike the handicap that you start the game with, but I think that, again, if your interest here is designing your character to suit your playstyle, it's great that you can tweak these aspects of the character, because I'm sure just like I don't use shields, I don't even pay attention to them, I just throw them away or whatever. There's people who never use the roll because they use shields.
Yeah, fair. And that's I feel that speaks volumes to like what I think the Souls series has always been, like the RPG focused version of Souls games. Like it was always that had the freedom of builds and exactly right.
Yeah, and there's art to it, really. Like
the other ones are more locked in and don't really allow that freedom. So it's cool to see that this game has that and expands upon it in different ways with the iframes, etc. Like it's just
you can do all kinds of really interesting things with your character. There's new spells that make anyway, so that's a whole other thing to get into. But there are a number of new spells added, and the way spells work here is a little bit different too. There's uses attached to each one, and I like that that the character building, to me, is more subtle and advanced than in the first game. But in other respects, it just plays better. Feels like as you're moving around, it's more responsive.
They improved over the years, made it a better game than the first.
In every mechanical and technical sense, the game is an advancement on the first one. I'm not talking about the art or the design or anything like this, but the
Which
raw,
is top notch anyway. But
true, it is. The raw, technical elements have all been improved, and that's the technological parts and the game mechanics themselves. I think you can just play a few minutes of some of the early levels, and it's immediately apparent that you're playing a more fluid Souls game.
Yeah.
It's something that they carried forward in each one of their titles since then. Too.
Yeah. By the time you get to Dark Souls 3, it feels very polished, clean, nice. Like it's amazing. Yeah. Incredible games.
On top of that, the boss design is, the bosses in the first Souls were great bosses. I love them. They're very memorable bosses, but a number of them are just super easy because if you understand what you're doing, you can just quite literally walk around them in a circle, and most of their attacks will miss you. It's
so far I've had the biggest struggle was the one I just did, the wolf with the sword in its mouth. Like that. It's been the hardest one I've had to do so far. Like
it's because he has a spin attack. Otherwise, you'd just be able to stand behind him like most monsters in the Souls
games,
right?
You still beat him by just standing directly under him and swiping and then backing out when you can. But
just gotta dodge his.
Exactly. Once you learn how to dodge through his sword, what the timing is, then you pretty much just get in there and start swiping away. You just got to be patient.
Yeah, that's why I think that the first Souls, it's a beautiful and well-made game, but its bosses, compared to later entries in the series, just feel unremarkable.
They feel archaic at this point.
Against.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas they've definitely improved.
They have, for sure. And of course, there's some bosses like that here. Some of them are really, really easy too, but they do have bosses that resemble the bosses that you'll see in later entries like Bloodborne and Sekiro, where like they have tracking on their attacks. They have relentless combos that you can't just dodge one and then the rest of it misses you, right? Like, here they have 3, 4, 5 hits and each one is tracking you.
They're trying
to get out of the way, right?
They are trying to eliminate you.
And this is something that I really like, and people will respond that there was a number of reused assets and gank bosses in this game. And whilst a couple of the bosses that you meet early in the game do reappear as common enemies later on, I think this is something in all of the Souls games, for better or worse. So I don't know that that's a strike particularly against this one. In relation to the first, right? And on top of that, I think it probably has like double the bosses of the first game.
Holy crap!
Of that pool, a large portion of them, I'd say a good third of them, are unique, like gigantic and memorable bosses. That
I was gonna say that the scale of them seems bigger from the footage I've seen of you playing 2 than
some of them certainly are.
My playthrough right now in 1. They seem
a lot of giant dragons,
big things,
literal giants. Like, this monster called the Demon of Song. That's a giant frog with a human being coming out of its mouth. It's messed up.
Lovely.
Lots of great examples, but in any case, the bosses, in terms of at least how you play against them, how it feels to beat them, they have more interesting and complex combos that you have to learn to respond to, unlike the first one where you just employ this universal tactic of strafing around the dude 90% of the time.
Getting behind them, under them, whatever the fuck.
You can just avoid, you don't even have to dodge, and very few bosses in the first Souls game do I remember, other than like Artorias, Gwyn, like the last few bosses or the DLC bosses, like do I remember really struggling and doing anything other than just walking, like sticking tight up to them and walking around them.
Walking around.
Attack straight up. They they miss you most of the time, right? It's very rare in that game that you actually have to learn the combos and dodge through them like you do in every boss in Bloodborne or Dark Souls or in Elden Ring, let's say, right?
Of course.
So I do think that 2 represents an advancement on that. It wasn't even a deficiency. I don't think it was just an underdeveloped or early aspect of the Souls games. And Demon Souls was even more in that direction of totally simple
for sure.
boss design,
I didn't struggle against. I didn't struggle against a lot of bosses in Demon Souls.
Demon Souls, the very last one, the False King, was the one that I remember struggling against.
King Alan
takes your souls.
That's true.
You lose levels every time.
That is very frustrating. And that was a pain, of course, for obvious reasons. He takes your soul level, but even that, I don't know. I think it took me like a day or 2 to figure it out and get it done.
I remember playing the Demon Souls remake and being just totally out on that boss and wanting it to be over because it was,
that's fair too.
But in any case, here we do see that progress tending towards what we find in Elden Ring, which I think was in some ways excessive
much
in what
better.
they did. But
much more advanced, let's
much
say.
More advanced boss design,
yeah, not always necessarily better, but
mechanically more subtle and complex in terms of systems, better boss design, just more smooth and fluid to play. So mechanically, I think this game gives the original Dark Souls a run for its money, like it should, because it came out after. It's a technical sequel, right? So without question, a game by the same company shouldn't be materially worse than the last one they made. That should always be out of the question, right?
Yeah.
That would be awful, right? That would represent your failure as a technician, as a mechanic, right?
Yeah, not making any advancement or strive, you know.
No, that's you know, it's conceivable that your idea won't be as good as your last one, and who can blame you for that sometimes?
Yeah.
But your work, like mechanically, should always be improving.
Right? Exactly.
And that's something we do see in From's games, I think. Turning though to the story and world design, I think like this game, man, it really made the Souls series what it is, you know, because in the original Dark Souls, spoilers obviously, you have a choice at the end to either continue the Age of Fire like Gwyn did there, or to end it and just usher in this Age of Dark. And it seems like that was it does seem like maybe they allude to this not being final one way or the other in the first game, but it's certainly not something that is hard-coded into the game. It's not something that seems that they really were running with at that time. And the story that you see conclude in Dark Souls 3, where like there's this cycle of the worlds beginning and ending with the Age of Fire, and you know the only way to conclude it is taking the Dark Soul and going into the painted world there and giving it to letting somebody use it as pigment to paint a new world and all this stuff, you know, kind of disavowing the cycle and all this. But the idea of that being cyclical came from Dark Souls 2, right?
Oh yeah.
Dark Souls 2 is like, if Dark Souls 1 is, you know, the ending of the first Age of Fire, and Dark Souls 3 is about the ending of all, like the very final Age of Fire.
Oh wow.
Dark Souls 3 rather. Dark Souls 2 is about seeing what happens in between. You know, you go to this Kingdom Drangleic in like the middle period of history, I guess, if there's such a thing in Souls, like, and you know, you see like the king there who ran it succumbing to the curse, just like Gwyn did back in the day, and like there's suggestions that this has happened multiple times, and then you go into the DLC and see many other kingdoms that this has happened to. Right? So Dark Souls 2 is kind of like seeing the world as it goes through these cycles, and without this game, it wouldn't have been possible for them to make 3. 3 is about the trajectory that they initiated with this title, right?
True, yeah.
And even more so with this, they did the Scholar of the First Sin, which was like an update or not quite a remake.
It was like the remaster.
They went in and they added story elements and certain things, and they added this character Aldia and the concept of the first sin and all of this stuff, and that was really what happened in 3, like the resolution of that tension, the idea that Gwyn like violated the order of nature by trying to perpetuate his vision of the world against its own natural end, right? So I really like that. You know, Dark Souls 2 as a gesture of storytelling and world building, and I mean this in the broadest possible strokes, like what's going on in the world, you know, with the first flame and with hollowing and shit like this. You know, it's really an advancement on Dark Souls 1 as well. In no uncertain terms, right? It takes that stuff and it answers questions that are inevitably going to arise from the first one, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And I like that a lot. Very cool. And when it comes to the actual map that you explore, this is another thing that people had criticisms about with this game. You know, there's this common remark that it's not spaced out properly, right? Like if you were to look at the first Dark Souls map, you know, in from without it, if you could look at it all at once, you would see that all the locations are properly spaced out.
They all fit together like a puzzle, right?
Everything is properly, it's where it would be if the location was real.
Yeah.
In this game, apparently, it's not so. Like some connective tunnels are shorter than they should be.
Yeah.
Things aren't where they would actually fall proportionally.
Which is actually impressive in terms of game design, that they're probably able to fit more by overlapping whatever's going on behind the scenes. And
I think to address this in the first place, before I start gushing about the map, it seems necessary. What you said is important, right? Like we have to ask. Not that it's not cool what Miyazaki did building the map in 1. That's great. It's awesome.
It's awesome. Amazing.
I really, you know, we just talked about it a week ago. You can hear our thoughts there. It's incredible. But at the same time, is that required to represent a coherent and beautiful world in a video game? You know?
Yeah, no,
it's nice. It's great. But this is a representation. You know, it's not a literal depiction. It's not a photograph of something. It's a rendition of that world, right? Like, it's the same as when people say, you know, there's ludonarrative dissonance in Uncharted because Nathan Drake is a nice guy in the cutscenes but kills people off of the outside of the cutscenes, right? It's like, no, man, because it's not supposed to be a literal depiction of his life. It's a representation of this person, you know, going through a story in a video.
Yeah, you don't see him taking a like you're not. It's not one for one.
Realism is not the goal,
no.
right? We're not trying to be faithful to the physical world outside of the representation, you know?
Yeah,
and in the same way, adhering to like the laws of space and time, such as they exist outside of a video game, in a strict technical sense, that's not apparent to the player as they play is not.
Yeah, exactly. That's important. What you just said,
world,
it's not apparent to you while you're playing. It's not something that you encounter that doesn't make sense. It's well disguised under the hood that I guess people have picked on and noticed and are like, nah,
the standard is not realism, in other words, right? Like I don't think pointing to the thing and saying it's unrealistic is in any way a criticism of it.
Yeah.
It would be a criticism to say it's incoherent, it doesn't make sense. As you're playing, it feels stupid.
Right.
This is not the case, actually.
Yeah.
You go like through a tunnel underground and it's not 10 miles long. You're like, oh man, I really wish I walked the other 7 miles, right?
No, please, no.
It's not germane to that representation, right? It doesn't serve it in any way. It's perhaps better what they did here. And like you just said, if this is the means for them to conceal like their connection of parts that are otherwise difficult to connect, then that's perfectly valid way to go about it, right? You know, it's not, like I just said, it's not a criticism to say it's unrealistic. It's a criticism to say it's incoherent on its own terms, and that's not the case here.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Dark Souls 2 is a very competent game and very well made.
It leads into this here. Like what you get in Dark Souls 1 is this sensation that you're like in this tightly wound, important place where everything's stacked on top of everything else, and it's cool. It's a great thing.
Yeah.
Here instead, you get the sense that you're traversing a wide open space. Like you start in this one place, this town called Majula, like a hub world, and you see off in the distance all the major landmarks you're going to visit, right?
Cool.
It's not like there are some up there and some are down there and some are underground. Like here, there's this fortress, the castle, right? Like the ruins out in the ocean. You're going to visit all these places, and it's like you're traversing the countryside instead of going up and down caves and stuff in a
I like that they changed it up from the first. That's exciting.
And it is different, of course. I think even in how it's presented to you, like the view you get from Firelink Shrine is that you're in the center of something. You see Blighttown down there, Anor Londo's up there. You see, the places you're going to go, but it's not this wide spread open area. Wide spread out area, excuse me. It's instead like conical and stacked on top of itself. So
awesome.
I do think it's different, but it's not, again, like what's the criticism
what's
here?
the
I don't
problem?
understand. Right? That they adequately conveyed the sense of crossing a country using shorter hallways. That's the criticism. That's what it seems like to me, right? That's the sense that I get from exploring this game, And I really do like in FromSoft games, I've taken so many screenshots of this, how you see where you start. You see when you start where you're going to end up. And when you get there, you see where you came from, They always accomplish this in all of their games, and it's true here too. I really like that feature, right?
Right, they do.
They're skilled artists of like backgrounds and skyboxes and stuff like that. You always get the sense that you've physically traversed a space, even if that space is conveyed in shorter than would be realistic connective hallways or what have you, right? Like, I don't.
At the end of the day, both versions are impressive in their own right. Like, the actual conception of the space itself in Dark Souls 1, like that's impressive that they've done that. And then in 2, just the technical aspect of making the world work.
But if we recognize that the map is built that way to convey the sensation of traversing a massive continent or something like this, then we can appreciate another sense in which it's as good as its predecessor, and it does something new and original on its own terms, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I like this about it. It's got the, a more adequately fleshed out universe on the one hand, and the map is different and cool in its own way. And you do get a lot of vistas and the sense of traversal across a wide open area that you do not get from the first game, right? Yeah. I like that a lot. It's very rare in the first game to stand somewhere high and look out on like the horizon, with nothing there blocking it.
Yeah, they probably had less chances to do that.
Yeah, you don't. You're always behind the walls of something, or you're underground, or even in Anor Londo. When you do stand high up, you can only see a little bit, and there's the cathedral in front of you and some mountains and trees, right? But here you
That's
always
part
get
of the technical side of things too, right?
Sure,
the advancements of
it is
them,
too. That's
building these games over the years, getting better and better, right?
But here you do get to, everywhere you're looking, you see like far away in both directions. It's really cool.
That's a real big win for the art department, it seems like. Amazing, right?
As in the art, unquestionably there. Like if we're not even talking about how you explore the physical space, but in terms of art, it's very good. Like I unhesitatingly can say that it's better than the first game.
Yeah,
I think,
nice.
Yes, its art is
top-notch,
surely an improvement. Yeah, top-notch Dark Souls 2 art,
Beautiful. I can't wait to get into it after I hopefully get through 1.
Yeah.
Working on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
On this Souls kick that we're on, where all we talk about is Souls, and that's how we're going to keep it for now. So if you like Souls, then check in on it.
That's why. It's worth checking out, too. It's, I think, as good as the first in both mechanical and conceptual respects, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And the criticisms that people have of it are more to point out that it's not a literal representation of a space or something like this, which I don't think is interesting as a criticism of a game. It's not a mark against it, right?
No, yeah.
You're just describing it. You're not criticizing it.
Yeah, fair enough. That's
it never
one way to look at
to
it.
be that anyways.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Play Dark Souls 2. It's very good. I'm looking forward to getting into 3 and seeing how I mean, it's much more recent that I played it than these ones, but
I think it's different when you play them in succession like this, instead of waiting years for them to be developed. When you just exactly. When you jump in 1, 2, 3, like it hits differently. It's cool to analyze, right?
Yeah, that's right. All right, guys, thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll talk soon.
Oh yeah.
Play that Dark Souls.